So today I'm going to talk about forming habits and new neural pathways. So first of all, what are neural pathways? So in our brain, we have millions of what we call neural pathways, and they are there for habits, behaviors, ways of thinking, basically everything that we do. So for example, you will have a neural pathway for driving your car. You will have a neural pathway for brushing your teeth. You will have a neural pathway for walking. You will have a neural pathway for literally everything that you do. Now imagine driving your car. When you get in the car, you don't have to think about doing it, do you? You generally get in the car, you drive, you go off, you're not thinking about how to drive that car. Now that is because that neural pathway is so embedded in your brain that you subconsciously know how to do that. So we'll have millions of those neural pathways for things that we do, and they will be good and helpful things. But we will also have those neural pathways for things that may have been helpful in the past, but aren't necessarily helpful to us anymore. So unhelpful habits, behaviors. So when we are thinking about forming new habits, what is happening in our brain is that we are actually forming new neural pathways. So an analogy that is really going to help you to think about this in a much better way. Imagine that you have got two different pathways in the snow. So one pathway is footprints in the snow that you have been down many times before. Those footprints are really ingrained in the snow, really embedded. It's easy just to plonk your feet in it and walk down that pathway. Now we've got another pathway and it's completely fresh snow. So if we want to start walking down that new one, it's really uncomfortable to do it at first. You really have to dig your footprints into that snow. You can't just run to the end of that new pathway. You've got to do it step by step, bit by bit. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. The more those pathways and those footprints, get embedded, and it becomes easier and easier. And eventually you get to the end of that pathway. And actually that old one, because you haven't walked down for a while, it's getting covered up. And we no longer rely on it. We no longer need it. So this is a really great way of thinking about when you are forming new habits and pathways and behaviours. So when we start to form a new habit, we have to remember that it takes time. So did you know that it takes roughly 90 days to even start to embed that habit, to even start forming it? Generally speaking, it takes about 120 days for it to be really embedded, that it's sort of subconscious, you don't have to think about it anymore. But those from 0 to 90 days are pretty conscious, especially at the beginning, changes, pretty uncomfortable changes that you have to do to build that habit up. So when we're thinking about changing a habit, a pathway, a behaviour, we have to remember that there is going to be some discomfort there with it at the beginning. And this is why lots of people, for example, end up giving up on New Year's resolutions at the start of the year. Because one, they set themselves too big targets, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in a moment. And two, they realise that it's hard work. So actually they give up on it. Now, when we're forming new habits and behaviours, we have to remember there's always going to be a little bit of discomfort because it's something new. So when we do something new, our brain automatically perceives it as a threat. It automatically perceives it as a bad thing. So it will think, well, okay, I don't want to do that. I'm used to going down that old pathway, so we better not do this. So a good way of helping yourself with that is remembering that that short-term discomfort is not going to outweigh that long-term benefit. Think about the long-term benefit rather than that short-term discomfort. Now, I mentioned those small steps as well. When we're thinking about changing a habit or pathway or behaviour, what we need to do is break things down into really small steps. Because if things are too big, we set ourselves too big a target, then that is when it becomes overwhelming and we don't end up sticking to it and our brain completely freaks out. Whereas the way that our brain works best is breaking things down into small steps. Because when we actually take a step, an action, which is uncomfortable, our brain produces dopamine. Now, dopamine is a chemical that we get from sense of achievement. Taking action can be from ticking things off lists, completing tasks, anything like that. We get it from cleaning, tidying, decluttering as well, which is why we always feel good after doing those things. But once we've taken that action, our brain sparks that dopamine and it thinks, okay, yes, I can do the next thing. So our brain likes something that's completed. And if you're setting yourself too big a target, that doesn't get completed. So small steps is the way to go. Now, if you compare this to your physical journey, so I'm sure when you all started doing stuff physically, You weren't able to do it all at once. It took a bloody lot of hard work and a long time, I imagine. So mental fitness and changing things mentally, whether that's building confidence, whether that is changing your ways of thinking, whether that is starting to put boundaries in place with people more, changing a routine, whatever that is, you're not going to do it instantly. Your brain works in exactly the same way that physically your muscles work, because we have to form those pathways. You're not going to get a six-pack overnight. I'm sure you all know that. Mentally, it works in exactly the same way. So it's consistency, commitment, showing up, a little bit of hard work, but the more and more we do it, the easier it becomes. And consistency is really key, because again, physically, think about if you were to stop doing the exercises that you were doing at the moment, then you would lose that progress. It's the same mentally. Many of us think that actually once we get to a good place, we can stop doing those things that helped us to get to a good place. But actually, those are the things that are going to keep you at a good manageable level where you can cope with the stressful situations much better. So consistency is really key. So when you're thinking about changing a habit or behaviour, so let's, for example, think about saying no to people a little bit more. That's a good example. So small steps. So it might be, okay, right, I need to give myself a little bit more time in the week. So that first little step might be, okay, I'm going to look at my diary. I'm going to plan in when I want a little bit of time to myself. And then I'll start saying no to people a little bit more, in the fact that I might just say, I can't do that, I'm busy. And then you do that, it's uncomfortable to say no to that one person at first. Then the next step is building on that and prioritizing your time a little bit more, and then it becomes easier and easier to do so. You form that new pathway that is so uncomfortable at first, that old one gets covered up, that new one is formed, you stay consistent with the habit that has helped you to feel good, and that's how we build those new neural pathways.